Hello everyone, welcome back to my StarCraft 2 stream. Before I get started with my intro, I wanted to just make the quick announcement that I am going to lower the amount of games that I will play every day to 3 games instead of 4 as it was previously. The amount that I'm going to require myself to play. Just quickly, there's a couple reasons for that, and one of the reasons is just mainly like ladder nerves. It's been like driving me crazy with like the jitters and stuff by the time I get to the 4th game. I'll probably improve over time, and I may increase the amount of games I play later again. But it's just been a big thing for me that I've had difficulty just with the mental exhaustion and with just the nervousness of playing on the ladder quite that much at one time. So I'm just going to lower it down to 3 and see where we go from there. The other reason that I wanted to do that is also because the stream has been running for over an hour with kind of short intros, relatively short intros, and not spending a whole lot of time talking about the replays that I've been analyzing and stuff, and I would like to aim more directly for that 1 hour mark. Of course, the downside of only doing 3 games is that sometimes maybe they'll end up being 3 cheese games and the stream is over in a half hour, but I guess that's not the end of the world. So anyway, I will be playing 3 ladder games from now on, except when I feel like playing more. So, you know, some of those days when it ends up being really short, I might just decide I'll queue up for another. So, today in my intro, where I kind of talk a little bit about myself, my past, about gaming, about the internet, whatever I feel like talking about, I wanted to get into my history with strategy gaming, just for a little bit of nostalgia and, you know, just kind of for fun and to give people a little bit of background. So I first got into video gaming actually in the late 80s. My dad brought home a Nintendo Entertainment System with Super Mario Brothers and Contra. So that was, you know, pretty amazing at the time for me. I was like 4 years old, I think, and never went back. Had a 286 at home and played games like Civilization and MS-DOS on that as well. Did all the kind of normal stuff that gamers of my generation did. So it was pretty great. Of course, strategy gaming was never foremost in my gaming life in terms of the genre of game that I enjoyed the most. I always was a big fan of shooter games, and I liked RPGs quite a bit as well, more so the older I got. Strategy games would have been more third place for much of my life, although there have definitely been games which I spent a lot of time with, which were strategy games. However, I've had like such an extensive gaming history in general that I have actually played a lot of strategy games, relative probably to, well, a more casual gamer at very least, even though I would rate shooters higher over what I've done. So, how did I first start getting into strategy games? Well, I mentioned Civilization. That would probably be one of the first ones I played. But really, it wasn't so much computer or console games at all, which initially got me into them. I have cousins on my mom's side, and we kind of grew up sort of together, seeing each other semi-infrequently, but we were like really good friends back when we were younger. So back at this time, we did a lot of different things together, just normal little kid stuff, imaginary games and so forth, but we also did board games like chess and Risk, and we played Legos together. And this sort of game evolved where we were playing something that we called Lego Wars, and we would make these ships, these like spaceships, which would be like as sturdy and as well constructed as we possibly could make them. We would do these like fancy interlocking walls, and just make them like really strong to where you could drop the darn thing on a hard tile floor and it wouldn't break. So that was kind of what we would do. And then what we would do is we would make this little Lego torpedo, which was even tougher built, and we would line up our ships next to each other, and we would take turns with each of our torpedoes, and we would try to break down the walls of each other's ships by putting as much force into slamming them as possible. And the first person to kind of really break through and do a lot of damage would win the game. And the goal was to destroy each other's ships. So what does this have to do with strategy gaming? Well, we actually didn't live close to each other in these early days, So we had to kind of figure something out to do when we were apart. This was before the internet, keep in mind. This was like early 90s maybe. And none of us had the internet. And in fact, we didn't really get the internet until closer to like the late 90s. And then we started to get dial-up and such. But back then, there was no internet. So we had to think of something to do, and we did it by snail mail. We decided to start evolving this sort of mind kind of strategy-ish sort of game. It was kind of in between a strategy game and a role-playing game. It had very loosely defined rules, and we still called it Lego Wars because it was based off this initial thing that we did with Legos. But we had these empires, these imagined empires, these space empires that we had evolved in our minds, and we would invent these aliens to ally with each other, and all kinds of stuff like that. We would look at encyclopedias, and we would, sit there and we'd come up with pseudo-scientific technologies that we would invent. Keep in mind we were like, 8 or 9 years old or something like that at this point. But we were like really into military history and science fiction and all this stuff. So we'd work all that into our kind of like gameplay. So we did that for a while, and we would kind of write like snail mail letters to each other with treaties and descriptions of all our different technologies and the fleets that we had and all kinds of stuff. So that was where I started to think about like getting an advantage, because we would sort of battle against each other with our imaginary empires. Now I would start to think about how to get an advantage over him in like a more strategic sense, or in ways to kind of use my mind to gain that marginal advantage that we talk about in strategy games. Even though there weren't even that strictly defined rules. But that was a lot of fun. So it was still with these cousins, and I say him because it was mainly me and my cousin Ben. My cousin Joe also was involved in this some, but not quite as much. So I was kind of spending a lot of time hanging out with my cousin Ben, and we would play a lot of games together. So we got into this game called Space Empires 2, and I'll just go ahead and bring this up. This is an old shareware game. I'll show you. Okay, so this was like one of the old, they call them 4X games. They had like the exploration, the conquest, and everything. So this was an old, just kind of awesome shareware game that even though it like looks horrible, but we loved it because you could like design your own ships, and you had all this stuff that you did strategically. We would sit down when we were actually able to like hang out together. We would sit down and we would play this game turn-based. We'd play it for like 4 hours and just sit there and constantly play this thing. So that was really awesome. That was probably the first strategy game I got really into and would play these like long marathon sessions of, and was into it for months and months. So that was really great. So that was turn-based, and at this point I hadn't really done any RTS. Probably Command and Conquer had been floating around a little bit. Some of the earlier ones like Dune, maybe Warcraft 1. The first RTS that I really got into, and this was also with my cousin Ben, we did this together, was Red Alert. And if I'm remembering this right, I think Red Alert had this kind of thing where you could use your dial-up modem to dial directly into the other person's modem and just connect that way without the internet. So I think that was my first like kind of it was sort of pseudo-online multiplayer gaming, and we would get on there and do 1v1s by like modem to modem with Red Alert, with these custom maps where we could get all the resources we wanted and turtle up and play our like game that way. So got really into Red Alert, and that was probably the first RTS that I was super into. Eventually, me and my cousin Ben stopped being like quite as good of friends, and I kind of moved on to other friends in another part of my life. And at this point, like after all this, like I hadn't really gotten into any Blizzard games. StarCraft had come out, Warcraft 2, Diablo. I hadn't really gotten into any of those games. I was never a Blizzard fan in the early days like that. Instead, the game that I really liked, the RTS game that I got into around this time, was Total Annihilation. I thought this was the coolest game. I just loved the interface. I loved like how they streamlined macros so much. I love that it was like fully 3D, because I was like building my own computers at this time and just starting to really get into that. It was like 3D accelerators are so awesome. So you had like these kind of graphics, and it really didn't actually look any better that much than like some 2D art game. But I just thought it was so cool that it was actually in 3D and you could see all the pieces bouncing around the map and everything. Um, and one thing that I really liked about that game was you could kind of mess around with the units. You could make your own units, customize the units, and there were all these user-made packs of units you could get. These expansion packs came out which added like so many units to the game. And I was starting to get really into modding at this time, and I kind of carried that over into first-person shooters and such as well. And that became a really big part of my life, and I'll talk about that perhaps some later day. But so that was one of the things also that really attracted me to Total Annihilation. And I still think that's one of the greatest RTS games that's ever been made. But I wasn't really into StarCraft throughout all this time. I never, I might have played it, you know, once or twice at friends' houses or something, but I never really like bought it and got into it. I spent my gaming budget on Total Annihilation. So that was kind of what I was doing at this time. So finally, I do get into Blizzard games with, of course, Warcraft 3. And later I would get into World of Warcraft and stuff, but I don't really want to talk about all that. But I did play Warcraft 3. You know, I played some 1v1 ladder games and had my fun doing that. But eventually I really wanted to get it. I really started doing custom maps. I started doing like tower defense, and then progressed from there into, of course, Dota. Obviously being the most popular one at that time and probably ever for Warcraft 3. So, you know, Dota All-Stars was really big, and I played that on and off for a long time. As recently as a couple years ago, I was still like on and off getting back into that game. It wasn't that well balanced, and of course MOBAs are some of the most rage-inducing games that have ever been made and all that stuff, but that was probably the one that had the most like lasting appeal to me. Was Dota. So of course that led me to a year ago getting into League of Legends, and which is kind of what brings me up to today. So I got pretty good at League of Legends, and it's the first time playing a game when I started to really care about how good I was at the game. I got into their ranked system, their ranked ladder, and I started playing those, and I got you know, fairly high. I think I got to about 1600-ish on their ranked ladder, and obviously the top players at the time would have been like 2200, and average player would have been about 1200. So I'm not sure exactly where that would have put me. Maybe in the top 5%, 4%, maybe even a little better than that. So I started to really care about how good I was at League of Legends. But at the same time, I was unhappy with the way that Riot, which they're the makers of League of Legends, I was unhappy with how they were handling the esports aspects of it. They didn't have replays, observer mode. This isn't exactly Riot's fault, but there weren't many like tournaments out there. There wasn't all that much interest in playing the game competitively. I mean, there's still more than the average game, and that's why I started to get into caring about how good I was at it and started getting into that aspect of it. But there wasn't as much as I would like. And it's from that I started to hear about StarCraft 2 more and more. Started to hear about Day9. I started watching his dailies even before I ever bought StarCraft 2 or ever loaded it up for the first time. And it started to seem really appealing to me to switch over to StarCraft 2 as I got more frustrated with League of Legends. So that's what brought me up to where I am today, and to my goal of becoming, you know, at least good at this game compared to the average person, and getting into Masters League, which obviously is nowhere near a pro-level player, and I don't really have that high of aspirations that I expect to ever get to that kind of level. But I do aspire to be legitimately good at StarCraft 2, which I would consider being in Masters League to be legitimately pretty good at the game. So, you know, obviously just compared to the average player. So that kind of is just a really brief recap of my strategy history. There are plenty more games worked in there, you know, Supreme Commander, Rise of Nations, going all the way back. There were plenty of other games that I played over the years, but those were kind of the big ones, the big like milestones in my evolution as a strategy gamer. So that's what brings me up to StarCraft 2, and that brings us up to today. So from there, I think I'm just going to wrap it up and head into the replay segment. I know that was a relatively long intro, Hopefully future ones won't be quite so bad, but so